Got one first-round game where a southern team goes up north to play in cold conditions, and that's SMU out of Dallas going up to Penn State, State College, Pennsylvania, where it's expected to be 25 degrees at kickoff, 10% chance of snow, and a wind around a 12-mile-an-hour or so. We got Tom Fornelli and Shehan Jeyarajah with us here. Tom, I was watching the coverage of the Minnesota-Wisconsin game, and I couldn't help but notice, you got Jacqueline D'Agostino, a Florida kid, coming up into the cold. People act differently. They act much differently. If they're in the South, they come up north in the wintertime. Is this going to be a problem for SMU? Their average kickoff temperature this season is over 72 degrees.
It is and it isn't. I mean, the wind, I think, is the biggest factor. The cold you can get used to. It's when the gusts of wind start hitting you that you kind of just find yourself like tensing up and freezing up. But I think it's really important for SMU in this situation to get off to a good start in the game because of the weather. Like we saw in the ACC championship, they had a terrible start to the game. Clemson had 21 points before the first quarter was finished. If that similar kind of situation happens, if you're down in a hole in your SMU, it's the mental game of the weather. If you're cold and you're on the sidelines and you're down 2 scores early, you might quit. The doubt starts to creep in. You really don't want to be there, and things can, avalanche, to use the cold term. But I think if you get off to a fast start, honestly, it doesn't matter too much, because the more you're playing, like when you're playing football and you're out there doing anything athletic, you warm up. The cold really doesn't bother you. It's the sitting on the sidelines that can get to you. So if the confidence is going and they get off to a fast start, I do not think it will impact them. But again, it is important that they get off to a fast start, because if they don't, the mental game could kind of creep in.
Well, I'm sitting about 15 minutes away from SMU's campus right now. It's a pretty freezing 71 degrees yesterday, so I hope that that they weren't out practicing for this game there. But, look, I think that you're right. It's something that you just have to get used to over the course of the game, and I do think that they will. The one piece that I'm interested in is I think that where this impacts you most is when you're trying to move side to side versus north to south. As long as you keep things north-south, I don't think it matters too much. SMU's a really explosive team. They're a team that definitely makes a lot of quick cuts and things like that. So I think that maybe Penn State is built a little better for these conditions. At the same time, though, I expect SMU to adjust. I'm assuming that they're going to try to find ways to simulate the best that they can being in this cold weather. And I do think ultimately it's not going to be the thing that decides the game, but it could impact the game.
Yeah, something that also could impact the game is Penn State's backup quarterback situation, because we had Beau Pribula, their backup, who's played quite a bit this season and really had to come in and play a lot in a win against Wisconsin on the road earlier this year. Tom, he decides to go into the transfer portal, said it was a really difficult decision, but it's just a sign of the times, and he had to do it, according to him, and James Franklin's kind of on his side about this. But how could that impact this game?
I think it impacts it a lot, because he is their backup quarterback, but he, like you said, he's been involved in a lot of packages, a lot of stuff that Penn State likes to do throughout the game. He's part of their red zone offense, where they'll sometimes send Drew Eller out wide to play wide receiver and use Pribula as more of a mobile quarterback. Andy Kotelnicki is not shy about trying to get creative to find ways to just confuse defenses and give his teams, even if it's just for a fraction of a second, to cause a linebacker to stutter for one moment to open up a run lane for his team. He's not afraid to do that. So you take Pribula out of the equation, and it impacts their ability to do so. It's going to limit what they've been doing offensively all season. I think the counter will be, we've also seen Andy Kotelnicki use Tyler Warren a lot, both at center, at quarterback, at wide receivers, delivering concessions in the stands. They've lined up Tyler Warren everywhere. I think you will see an even larger role for Tyler Warren in this game to kind of replace Beau Pribula in that package.
Pribula had 3 carries for 12 yards in that Big Ten championship game against Oregon. And Shehan, a lot has been made about how Penn State's path appears easier than Oregon's path in this 6th seed spot, because you have SMU, then potentially Boise, then potentially a 2-loss Georgia team without Carson Beck, who's injured. Do they have the easiest path of anybody right now in the first round?
I think that there's a really good case that they do. Obviously, Texas is, as well gets Clemson and Arizona State. Those should be pretty manageable games. But, I think that the way that this bracket worked out for them just ended up being pretty positive. I mean, that 12-2 being Clemson of all teams, a team that's been there, done that, makes it a little bit more complicated. And so to get SMU, a team that's just now transitioning up from the Group of 5 level, and we'll be dealing with some depth issues, I imagine, over the course of the playoffs, along with Boise State in the next round, is going to be an interesting challenge. Now, I will say, in the next round, you get the Heisman runner-up in Ashton Jeanty. So I don't think that's going to be any sort of walk in the park, even if you beat SMU. But I do think that things worked out pretty nicely for them, which is not something that you could have anticipated necessarily for the number 6 seed.
To that point, Sportsline says the most likely championship matchup is Penn State against Texas due to the paths for those two teams. Let's go to the SMU side and talk about where this program has been. And Shehan, you talk about being just a few minutes away from campus right there and how far they have come. Of course, it goes back to the death penalty and then relative obscurity for quite some time. And then making this kind of jump their very first year in a power conference. How did they do it?
Well, I think it's kind of perfect that that this team is making this jump at this time. I started as a college football writer in the state of Texas back in 2018, which was the year that Sonny Dykes was hired. And I kind of view that as the start of their modern era in terms of building up to this point. Of course, Sonny Dykes really elevated them, taking them to 10 wins for the first time since the 80s. Rhett Lashley takes them to their first conference championship since the 1980s, and now they're in the college football playoff for the first time. So it's been a meteoric rise. This was a team that I was excited about coming into the year, but not one that I thought would have the depth and the talent to make it all the way to the college football playoff. They've stepped up and handled every single challenge put in front of them to this point. They beat TCU, a team that won 8 games by 24 points. They absolutely crushed Pitt. And look, they started slow, and I think the moment was a little big for them in the ACC championship game, but they managed to come back, and it took a 56-yard field goal to beat them, even after they outgained Clemson by over 100 yards. So this is a team that's talented. They're stocked with a lot of players who are blue chip recruits coming out of high school that have developed in a big way there. Elijah Roberts on the defensive line is a name to know. They made a quarterback change earlier in the season, going from a former blue chip Preston Stone to a hometown kid, Kevin Jennings, who led South Oak Cliff to a state title. So they're just a team that's really motivated, and I know they're excited for this moment.
And 3-0 straight up as an underdog this season. Wins against Tulane, TCU, and Louisville. The line is 8.5, Tom. Who do you like and who advances?
I think Penn State ultimately ends up winning the game, and I do think they cover. I just think that they have a little too much offensively for the Mustangs here. I don't think it's a great matchup for SMU, but I also do like the over a bit for this one. I think the Mustangs will be able to move the ball a bit themselves. It could be higher scoring despite the weather than most people think.
All right, Tom Fornelli and Shehan Jeyarajah with us here on CBS Sports HQ, previewing the first round games in the college football playoff. Of course, the Cover 3 podcast will go even more in depth this week and all throughout the college football playoff. First game is on Friday. 3 more follow on Saturday.